You all remember Peanuts, don't you? Remember Peanuts? The comic strip? Linus is watching TV, and Lucy comes in and says, "Turn the channel." Now, this is before remote controls, right? And Linus looks back at her and says, "How can you come into this room and just tell me to turn the channel?" And she says, "You see these 5 fingers? By themselves, they're useless. But when they come together, they're a terrible thing to behold." So Linus changes the channel. And as he's walking away, he looks at his hand and says, "Why can't you guys get together like that?" Well, unlike some Christians, we don't use unity to punish or threaten someone into doing what we want. There's far, far more value to unity than that. But even that in mind, Christians over the past few years have failed to see the value of coming together and creating community together, especially in the fallout of COVID. People just got out of the habit of understanding how important unity is. If you have experienced division in a group, in a family, at work, in a church, you can appreciate the value of unity. I'm sure we've all heard the quote, "To dwell above with saints we love, oh, that would be glory. But to dwell below with saints we know, that's another story." So what is unity? Why is it so important? And how do we get it? And those are the questions we're going to try to tackle this morning as we look at this psalm, at least in part. As I stated before, we are in a series in the Psalm of Ascent, and this Psalm 133 is all about contemplating our unity with one another. It's a classic description of unity and fellowship, what we have with one another. It's such a striking and intriguing imagery. So let's look at this together. And I'm reading from the NIV today, and I've transliterated as well the names of God in this psalm. Psalm 133, the Psalm of Ascent of David. How good and pleasant it is when Elohim's people live together in unity. It is like precious oil poured on the head, running down on the beard, running down on Aaron's beard, down on the collar of his robe. It is as if the dew of Mount Hermon, or Hermon we would say, were falling on Mount Zion. For there, Yahweh bestows his blessing, even life evermore. As you know, this is a Psalm of Ascent, and the author is identified in this psalm as David. The superscription, which is actually the header of the psalm, is a very early addition to the text, and I think it's totally reliable. It's a totally reliable historical marker. And so I believe David wrote this Psalm of Ascent. As Steve stated before, these are psalms of worship as the pilgrim travels to Jerusalem 3 times a year. At Passover in early April. Then 50 days later, they travel back on the day for Pentecost in May. And then in mid-September to October, the Feast of Tabernacles, followed immediately by the Day of Atonement. Showing David as the author reveals a man, a king, a father who didn't enjoy much unity in his life. His kingdom was divided. His family was torn apart. At least one of his sons hated him, and even one of his sons killed another. But David writes this psalm because he knows how this unity and division can hurt to the soul. Psalm falls into really 2 simple parts. Verse 1 is the affirmation of unity, and verse 2 is the illustrations of unity. And there's 2 of them. The first one is about the oil that's poured out, and the second one is about the dew that flows down. So let's look at the first affirmation of unity as it relates to our daily walk. And this is in verse 1. How good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. It's good. It's pleasant to live in unity in the community. In Hebrew, the word, the psalm begins with the word behold. It's not translated in the NIV. The idea, though, is to make an emphasis, to take a finger and to point at something and say, observe it, see the benefits of it, look very closely at this. And the NIV tries to stress it by putting an exclamation point at the end of the sentence. Doesn't do it for me, but the affirmation here is to look at how good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. The word good means agreeable, means valuable. Its aim, its focus is toward God. So it has an objective viewpoint. It shows its value in God's eyes. It is good, just like His creation. The second word, pleasant, means to be delightful and sweet. Unity is a flourishing experience with each other. Here we see more of a subjective viewpoint, the value of unity with each other. So unity is beautiful vertically and horizontally. But it raises a question, doesn't it? What is this unity that David is talking about? So let's talk about that. Let's talk about what it's not first, and then what it is. First of all, unity is not uniformity. Okay? It doesn't have to mean that we agree on everything. We don't have to have the same opinions. We don't have to have the same political viewpoints, or even agree on minor doctrinal issues. I call people like that cookie cutter Christians. And many churches are like that. Everyone thinks the same, dresses the same, even have the same color skin, even though they wouldn't admit to that. And that's not unity. You can have all the sameness of things and be totally divided. I'm not talking about major doctrinal issues either, such as the deity of Christ, the atoning work of Christ, the bodily resurrection, the inspiration of Scriptures, etc., etc. That would be sacrificing the truth for the sake of unity. So what is it? It's not sameness, but oneness in purpose. It's uniqueness moving in the common direction. Unity welcomes. It opens its arms to uniqueness. It embraces uniqueness as long as the goal of uniqueness is one purpose. For example, pianos are not tuned to other strings or other pianos. They are tuned to a common note on a pitchfork. An orchestra, or the band here, is not unified because all the instruments are the same. But the different instruments are playing the same song. Each contributes to the harmony of what is being played to create unity of movement and composition. Thus, same purpose. Ephesians 4, verses 4 to 7 actually supports this, and let me read it to you. There is one body and one Spirit, and also we are called by one hope of our calling. There's one Lord, there's one faith, there's one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. But to each one of us grace was given according to the measure of Christ's gift. So here we see oneness of purpose, the same mind, not sameness of function. For each of us was gifted uniquely by Jesus Christ. It's like the Trinity. Jesus, in his high priestly prayer in John 17:21, says this, that they may all be one, even as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they also may be in us, so that the world may believe that you sent me. So just as there is a oneness in the Godhead, in that they partake of the same nature, they are unique in their functions as God. So we are to have a oneness of purpose, yet uniqueness in terms of how we express that uniqueness in the world and for the world. That's why the church is to embrace cultural differences. Because it is through those differences that the unique expression of God's mission is given to the world. So verse 1 is really a summary statement of the entire psalm. As a matter of fact, when you study the Psalms, look at the first two verses. Usually, it's a summary of the entire psalm itself. It's a good way of just reading the Psalms and trying to understand them. But David's point is that unity is marvelous to behold. It's beautiful, it's pleasant. It is good from God's point of view and pleasant from our point of view. But what does this unity look like? How can we picture this in our minds? David now gives us two vivid illustrations of this unity. An oily beard and a dewy mountain. First, the oily beard. Verse 2. It is like precious oil poured on the head, running down on the beard, running down on Aaron's beard, down on the collar of his robe. Unity is like oil that is poured over us, in that it blesses every part of our lives. He says, it is like, he is giving a comparison here. It's precious oil on his head. The word precious here is the same word, the same Hebrew word used in verse 1 for good. Oh. So what David's doing is he's linking the illustration with the summary statement of the first verse. And it's oil that's poured on the head, and it flows down on Aaron's beard. And here David makes reference to Exodus 20, verse 22 to 33, and Leviticus 8, verses 1 to 13. This was an oil of consecration for Aaron the high priest. The oil was not just any kind of oil. It was a costly oil. It contained 6 kilos of liquid myrrh, 3 kilos of fragrant cinnamon, 3 kilos of fragrant cane, and 6 kilos of cassia. And finally, it was mixed with, now get this, it's mixed with 4 quarts of olive oil, all which amounts to about 50 pounds of the most fragrant spice you could think of. And it must have been like syrup pouring down over Aaron. And this was all poured on his head, flowing down on his beard and the collar of his robe. Here's a picture of it. Doesn't do justice, but it'll give you an image of what this was like, except amplify the fluid in terms of a gallon of this olive oil and mixture poured over him. Just as unity is valuable to God, verse 1, and so it is precious, good, as it runs down Aaron's beard to his collar of his robe, actually past the breastplate, which contained, by the way, symbols of the 12 tribes of Israel. Or to say it another way, unity covers everything. It made him and the people valuable and consecrated to God as a kingdom of priests, in which Aaron was the head. Uniqueness for a common purpose. Now, bringing this forward to us, a man or a woman who is a believer in Jesus Christ are part of one body, and we are to be in unity. We must give others the benefit of that unity by an abiding love towards one another. Are they the poorest? Are they the least spiritual? the least lovable, then that oil of our love is to fall on them as it moves down our garments. Note, it runs down. Love for others moves to those who are of low estate. It's not puffed up. It's meek and lowly of spirit. The olive oil of our love and ministry is to touch all the people as it runs down and pours down upon them. But there's a second illustration. It is like water flowing down. And this psalm, oil and water mix. And so in verse 3 we have, it is as if the dew of Mount Hermon were falling on Mount Zion. For there Yahweh bestows his blessing, even life evermore. Unity is like dew that refreshes us when we are dry and parched. Mount Hermon is in the far north of Israel. It is the highest mountain in Israel, over 9,000 feet high, and it's snow-capped year-round. I have a picture of it here. There it is. On the next slide, you'll see how it moves. In other words, here is Mount Hermon, and it says that the dew of Mount Hermon refreshes those who are in Israel down here. It's over 100 miles apart. David says the dew of Mount Hermon refreshes people in Jerusalem, an area that is parched, low in water, very dry. Mount Hermon enjoys 60 inches of rain per year. So just as the dew refreshes and invigorates Mount Hermon, so it brings refreshment and vitality to the traveling, weary pilgrim in Jerusalem. And so it does with those who are unified as believers. It brings refreshment to us and to each other. And notice again how David uses linking words again. You see the word in the verse 2 where it talks about running down. He repeats it twice. Running down, running down. Now look at the word in verse 3. Falling on. It's the exact same Hebrew word. The oil running down Aaron's beard covers us just like a believer under the headship of Christ. See, distance makes no difference to the value of unity. It knows nothing of geographical limits to its value for us. Why? Why doesn't it matter how far we are from each other when it comes to unity? Verse 3. For there Yahweh bestows his blessing, even life evermore. The word for gives us the reason for its far-reaching and refreshing value in our lives. And notice the word there. There Yahweh bestows. The better word there is commands. That's what the word means, to command. It's there that he commands his blessing. Where? There, in consecrated oil flowing down to serve others. There, in the refreshment of flowing water to the soul in a dry and desolate landscape. The reason to value unity as it has no limits, is because Yahweh is the ultimate source of unity. Notice the focus of the psalm. It pours down on Aaron to them. It covers all of us, from the rich to the poor, to the joyful, to the depressed, to the hurting, just as unity does that for us. It pours down from Yahweh, from the largest mountain to the dry and weary land, to parched and weary people in need of community, just like us. Yahweh is the source of all unity. And it results in life evermore. Now, this blessing isn't eternal life in heaven, but unity is a blessed life that lasts all of our lives because of the beauty of unity and the source of unity. God himself who gives it to us. He commands it to be so. So in summarizing the psalm, It's a short psalm that asserts by summary and illustration the value of unity to us and to God. It covers all who are in Christ and brings refreshment no matter where we are, because the source of unity is God Himself. Or simply put, living in unity is valuable and refreshing because it is good toward God and is pleasant toward each other. 1 John 1:7 says, "But if we walk in the light as He is in the light, we have fellowship with one another. And the blood of Christ, His Son, cleanses us from all sin." And here we see the vertical importance of walking with God and unity with God, and that it establishes the ability to have fellowship and unity with one another. So that's the value of unity. But how do you get it? Well, the psalm really doesn't tell us. So let's talk about that a little bit. I have 3 invitations for you to enter into unity. And they don't come directly from this psalm, but they come from the New Testament. So unity happens, number 1, when mission is our purpose. Philippians, who speaks a lot about partnership, about unity, and in the theme, one of the part of the thematic statements of the book, in chapter 1, verse 27, Paul says this: "Only conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel, so that whether I come and see you or remain absent, I will hear you that you are standing firm in one spirit, in one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel." John 13:35. "By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." You see, unity is not going to church. It's be the church in the world. Having mission as our purpose brings unity among us. Now, if you don't know the difference between going to church and being the church, what will happen is you'll end up in a stale form of organized religion and a passive, introverted, and routine kind of Christianity. Believe me, I've seen this. And where we only care about ourselves. I call this the holy huddle. For many of us, the only time community happens is on Sunday. But what happens on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, etc., has far greater significance in purpose as unified believers in Christ. Someone once said that the greatest hindrance to the movement of Jesus Christ in the world is Christianity. You see, it's not about the ritual Christianity, going to church and so on, but about the relationship a person has with Jesus Christ. That promotes unity. For example, if you come in contact with a person that you truly admire and respect, they have integrity, passion, courage, faith, hope, you might think, "Oh, that's a rare bird." But what happened if you came in contact with another person that was very similar, but different in some ways? Or maybe another person. You might say, "I want to be like them." Now, everybody has a different tipping point when it comes to trusting in Jesus Christ. But each one of us plays a role in that process by means of unity in mission. See, there are things in people's hearts that are just too heavy to carry. But when the church is united and moves together to lift that burden by the power of the gospel and compassion, that builds unity. When our mission is our purpose. So are you loving others as an expression of God's purpose in the world? If you are, that builds unity around a cause, around a mission, around a purpose. Number 2. Unity happens when we compromise our preferences, but not our beliefs. See, truth can never be sacrificed for unity. Why? Because unity can never be achieved apart from truth. As stated earlier, we are not about sameness of opinions, or political viewpoints, or the kind of music that we like, or the clothes that we wear, or even minor doctrinal issues. Ephesians 4:15 speaks to this issue. He says, but speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in all aspects into Him who is the head, even Christ. There's a very significant balance to be noted in this verse. It's love and truth. Love, if love is the river of blessing, then truth is the banks that's guiding and controlling its flow. See, our lives must be characterized by compassion and conviction. If we lack compassion, we'll have a message, right? But we won't have any audience. And we all know churches like that. If we lack conviction, we'll have an audience but no message. And we all seen churches like that too, right? We can compromise our preferences, but not our beliefs. Truth allows us to love with compassion, but also not compromise our convictions. So are you drawing hard lines around preferences with others in this church? If you are, then you are not promoting unity, but sameness. Are you affirming uniqueness of others as we walk with each other? See, that brings unity. Number 3, unity happens when we stop the me and Jesus and move to the we and Jesus spirituality. So let me explain that. Of all the books in the New Testament, Ephesians speaks of the plurality of community and the spirituality of community. The new man that's spoken of in the book is spoken in plural, and it's accomplished in community. If your spirituality is all about you and Jesus alone, it's not very spiritual. Oh, don't misunderstand me. I'm not against personal one-on-one time with Jesus. It's important for our capacity for God to increase. But if that's all it is, then you are missing out. You ever think that God could speak to you through other people? Can He use messages on Sunday, or through a Bible study, or through a life group discussion, that is through another to help you deal with life? Well, it's true, you don't really need a church to connect with God. I mean, Jesus is the connection, right? But God is not your equal. He is far bigger than you are. And this tiny container of our brain and our soul is not big enough to experience God alone. It's not. When we come together in unity, we bring a larger container of His presence among us. For example, have you ever felt beaten down by circumstances? Or just having a bad day, and then you come to church, and you experience worship, and are flooded with hope again? This happens when the Scriptures are opened and expounded. It happens when we worship God in spirit and in truth. There's something transcendent happens when you sit and allow God to speak to you through another person, a song, or through a group. Now, Steve and I have extra time and training to discover what God is saying to us, which you might or may not discover on your own. But sometimes we don't open the mail from God. We just don't open it. And we, all of us here, are to help with that. See, God created the church not just to connect with God, but also to connect with each other. Now, I know some of you are probably saying, well, the church has let me down. The church isn't what it appears to be. There are too many hypocrites in the church. And to all those criticisms, I answer yes. The church has and will let you down. And there are too many hypocrites in the church. That's why we invited you. And as I said before, we're all hypocrites in recovery. You know, if you went to your favorite coffee shop all the time, and you really got to know the people in that coffee shop, guess what? You'll find that they'll let you down too. And they will fail to live up to your expectations and even their own expectations. Why? Because they are human beings, just like us. See, you don't say, I'm never going to go to a coffee shop again because those people over there, right? As I said before, just because someone plays Bach poorly, they don't blame the composer. Any place where you go and people look perfect, they're lying to you. And you are lying to them if you come across like that. And unity and community, which should characterize the church, is the one place where you can say that you're broken and that you are a mess. And maybe even being a hypocrite is an upgrade for you. I don't know if you've noticed it yet, but life sucks. It really does. It's bad. It's painful. It's full of disappointment and grief. You can live something very important in your life in an instant. For me, it's a drummer friend of mine I played with for 20 years. I visited him this past week. He has Alzheimer's. And he's not there anymore. Maybe it's a sister who died in a car accident. Maybe it's a marriage that's destroyed spiritually, emotionally, physically. It's just torn apart. Just like that. And if you try to manage that alone, it's going to crush you. Charles Swindoll shares a story, part of a story that I think is relevant for us. And with this I close. He was a feature speaker at an event with Joni Eareckson Tada. If you don't know her, she became paralyzed from the neck down in a diving accident when she was very young. So when it came time for her, she actually could sing. She's going to sing a song, and the spotlight shined on her. Before she sang, she said this. She said, I don't have the muscles to reach those high notes because my diaphragm doesn't work well. So I really need your help to reach those high notes. And then she sang, when peace like a river tends my way, and sorrow like sea billows roll, whatever my lot has taught me to say, it is well with my soul. Perhaps some of you are paralyzed by grief, by suffering, by disappointment and sadness, and you just can't reach those high notes very well anymore. See, the benefit of unity is that you don't have to sing solo. You don't have to do life alone. Because unity is like oil running down our heads and our faces, covering us all. It's like water running down on dry and parched lives that brings hope and refreshment to us.